We are back at the Tuesday night crit. It's a windy, warm day. Not a big field today because this past weekend has been the state crit championship, which was held locally in a suburb of Dallas called Rockwall. And many guys locally did very well in those races, so congratulations to all of them. Pleased to see our local racers doing well in the state crit championship in all the various categories and age groups. So today there wasn't a secret, i.e. Cat 4-5 crit, because of lack of numbers. And again, I think it was also partially because there was a threat of rain today for this race, about 20% chance of rain according to my weather app. And in fact, it was sprinkling a little bit right before the race started. However, this particular course is pretty good for rainy conditions, even though I really hate racing in the rain, mainly because of an increased chance of crashing and slipping out and so forth. It's the last thing I want to do. Now you might say, why even do bike racing in that case? Good question. Sometimes I ask myself the very same question. So, what's going on in the race? We're picking up the action here. And what's been going on is I have 3 teammates in this race. 2 of the teammates in particular, Mike and Lynn, have been attacking over and over during the race. So looks like that is Mike on my right up here. So there he is. He's in the red, yellow, and black kit with the white fork on the red bike to the right there. And he and Lynn have been attacking, just going solo off the front and daring people to come join them, chase them, etc. Both Lynn and Mike have a little bit more of the what I would call breakaway power profile. So they have good ability to lay down consistent speed and power. And so, for example, that would be their strength rather than, say, a bunch sprint, which is very useful for me because if they are doing attacking off the front, I can allow my rivals to mark their attacks, and I get to sit in and not take part in any of the chasing. But I, at some point, may think about marking people that are trying to bridge up depending on what the situation is. So like any race, it's a little bit like pickup basketball. After a while, you kind of know the guys you play pickup basketball with. You kind of know their strengths and weaknesses, essentially what their power profiles are like, how much snap do they have, how much ability do they have to get away and stay off solo or get into a breakaway, or how much of a threat they are in the sprint. And of course, you're going to have a few wild cards of you don't know who they are or what their strengths are and so forth. And that's kind of fun too when you play basketball in a place where you don't know who those players are and you're quickly trying to figure it out on the fly. Anyway, right in front of me here on the left with the yellow bibs is Clint, and Clint is a breakaway specialist. So, boom, there goes Mike and Clint. And what happens is when guys do like attacks like this, the first one's usually not successful, the second one's not successful, and it just keeps happening and happening, and the same guys take on the responsibility of chasing and chasing often. And you can see that I'm here in the front, and I could have gone with them potentially. I wasn't like I didn't have the power to match them, but this was completely strategic on my part to let them go. One, if I had gone with them, it's much more likely the group would have chased, I think. 2 teammates in a breakaway of 3 potentially. That's a high risk maneuver. Mark's doing a good job. Here's my teammate. He's also my teammate here. He's in last year's kit. That's why it looks a little bit differently. And the orange bibs here. And he's bridged and marked this move to counter that move. So, um, yeah, so letting my teammate go with Clint is a strategy now that forces the other teams to chase and for me to sit in or mark some of these moves, but not pulling through. You can see that we had a gap there. Now, if the 3 guys in front of us, in front of me and Mark, had worked together and taken pulls and, pulled through, maybe we'd have a chance of staying off the front. I think we very well could have. In fact, perhaps if I had participated in it, we'd have a chance of staying off the front. And that might not have been such a bad strategic move, potentially, especially if I get up to the break or my teammate Mark gets up to the break and nobody else does, depending on how we played it. Or potentially, if all of us had gotten into the break, this whole group, this small group out the front, the five of us joining the two, and then we have 3 out of the 7. So we like our chances if we have 3 out of the 7. But again, it all completely depends on who's in the break. And that's the calculus that you have to also consider when you have a teammate in the break. Will the teammate be able to stay in the break versus getting dropped in the break? Will your teammate finish first out of the break? And sometimes, if your teammate doesn't have a big kick and there's a guy in the break that has a big kick who's a sprinter, there's a very good chance that your teammate will not win from the break if the break goes to the finish. Then the question is, are you okay with, if it's a 2-man break, it's second place. If it's 3-man break, maybe it's third place. If it's a 5-man break and your guy doesn't have a lot of snap, you're looking at a 5th place finish. And so you might end up in a situation where you as a team chase down your guy in the break. Now, ideally, if your guy knows that he cannot finish in the top 3 in the break, maybe he sits on the break if he has teammates in the back whom he thinks can do something at the end of the race if it all comes back to a bunch finish. Now, of course, we all, to some degree, worry about, okay, so there goes Philmon's brother. I forget how they're related. I think they're related. But he's making a bridge attempt up to the 2 guys, Clint and Mike. And so here we are. We're in a crosswind section here. The wind is coming from the left to the right, and it's pretty strong today. That's why I'm to the far right side here trying to catch as much draft as possible. And so this is a really good place, if you weren't working together, to gutter someone by going all the way to the right, leaving people with no draft. And it's an excellent way to break up the group and drop the group, is this little stretch through the crosswinds. Now, the people in front here are more interested in us working together to catch the break, thus they are not guttering the group. They prefer for the group to work together and hopefully for people to come around and take some pulls. As we make this left-hand turn, we are now into strong headwind, so you'll see almost in every lap that the average miles per hour drops. The speed drops as we go into this particular section of the ride. This guy in front of me, the Rockwall rider in the green, he's a very strong rider, very strong Cat 3. He's got maybe a little bit of the rollure kind of power profile. And there on the right is Ryan Chrissy, who is bridging up to Philmon's compatriot. I'm just blanking on his name for a moment. I apologize. But anyway, Ryan is a big threat. Ryan is the best sprinter in the group. And so it would be a little bit disastrous for Ryan to be in the breakaway and for it to be presently constituted for us, because I would favor Ryan to win that breakaway hands down, win the sprint, that is, at the end. However, looking at the situation, I was doubtful that he would be able to make it to the breakaway based on the distance. And, this is rolling the dice a little bit. It could have been that even if he does make it to the breakaway, maybe we still catch the breakaway if there's more of a concerted effort. But those are sometimes the gambles you take. You have to decide very quickly if you're going to mark a move and how to handle it, what to do about it. So you can see there's a pretty big gap up there. But it's a really windy day. It's really hard to be solo, taking these laps and really going faster than the group if the group's putting out any kind of effort. We see the guys on cadence here near the front. They've missed the breakaway. They're not represented up the road, so they are taking some of the pacemaking responsibility here. And again, a little bit of speed here on the left. Let me talk for a moment about the new gauges here, and you can see that I kind of screwed one thing up. For some reason, the kilometers per hour are not registering. Well, anyway, I thought for our people that out in the world that don't use the imperial system, I would include the kilometers per hour, but I forgot that my data file does not contain kilometers per hour, so I'd have to make a conversion in a data file. I don't know if there's any demand for that, if it's just one more step in a somewhat laborious process to make these overlays and videos. If you prefer to see kilometers per hour, maybe throw me a comment at the end of the video or below the video, so that maybe I can take a moment to add kilometers per hour to the video. For us Americans, we don't really relate too much to kilometers per hour, but this is a big world that includes more than just Americans, we know. Also, on the left side, we now have a new gauge showing the MPA and the power. So the MPA refers to the xert metric called maximal power available. That essentially is xert's way of telling me at any particular moment how much power I can put out. So that's very close to essentially my maximum, 1341. That number can change a little bit through the season depending on how much work I do. Well, rather, the peak number can change depending on what kinds of maximal power I've demonstrated on my rides, and how much that number decreases or how fast it decreases with the power output relates a lot to my fitness, both to the FTP and something called the high intensity energy bank, so to speak. In other words, the higher my FTP and also the better my ability to go above my FTP and put out power above my FTP for a longer period of time determines how far and how fast my MPA will reduce my maximal power available. So anytime I'm over my FTP, that number is going to decrease. And so you could probably determine my FTP from watching what happens here. So a little bit of power output here up to 600 watts, 500 watts, and you can see that the MPA is starting to trickle down just a little bit. With this new gauge, you can also see with maximal power kinds of situations, in other words, where I'm putting out a very hard effort, a maximal effort, you can see how the power curve relates to the MPA curve. And when it's perfectly done, in other words, when the metrics are modeling things correctly and I'm putting out my best effort possible, that red curve, the power curve, and the blue curve, the MPA curve, will closely approximate each other. If my power is higher than my MPA in a maximal effort, generally speaking, that leads to what we call a breakthrough in the xert system. Means that the model has been broken and the model be readjusted to account for my ability to put out power beyond what was expected and predicted by the model. So anyway, that's a little bit about the overlay and MPA and xert. So I really like having the xert in the video, the MPA. It's good for post-race analysis. So for example, if something didn't go your way in a race, like you got dropped, or you were in the breakaway but you got dropped, or you were in the breakaway but you got caught, you can look and see how close was I to the limit. And I've had an instance in the past where I wasn't close to the limit as I looked at it afterward, and that was kind of disappointing. Got dropped from the break but wasn't close to my limit. Now there are things that can happen besides just mental failure that causes that. When the MPA, and at least for me, if the MPA is something like 800, 600, I'm in big time hurting. I'm in prime. There's prime opportunity to drop me off the back if that happens. So anyway, that's a little bit about MPA and xert. We are now going through about the faster part of the course, where we get a little bit of tailwind right here, and then a little bit of crosswind as we veer over to this section, and then as we turn to the left, that's where we get again a little bit of a tailwind. So this part is a little bit tricky. This is this is the part where you're thinking about getting your sprint going. Not, of course, not in this part of the race, but at the end of the race. So you can see I'm at the very back here. I'm on Ryan's wheel, and we're cruising around. You can see that we're a little bit guttered, or tending to be more on the guttered side at this point, because the guys in the front are headed over to the right as the crosswind is moving from the left of the screen to the right of the screen. And this is providing those of us in the back, especially me, with the least shelter possible. So Ryan is riding over to the right, as he should, because he's catching a draft from the guy in front of him who's not quite over all the way to the right. And so guys are still chasing. Um, it's a little bit hard to see what's going on in the breakaway on the GoPro screen. Of course, we could see what was going on, but every time we'd come around here, and this is me moving up a little bit just to make sure that I knew the guy right in front of me would mark and cover this gap. At least I was pretty sure of it, even though he's pretty tired, I think, because he was trying to bridge for quite a while and didn't make it. Now he's back with us, but he's a strong rider, so he's not been dropped. And we can see that, of course, Ryan, he had made the earlier bridging attempt as well, but they had been caught. We can see a Texas A&M rider, Riker. I hope I didn't get his name wrong. He's there about 3 bikes in front of me in the maroon kit. Shout out to the Texas A&M cycling team and all the bike riders in College Station, Bryan College Station. Got to ride on several group rides in the past year with them as I was visiting College Station, and had a good time, and they're a bunch of great guys. I didn't personally know him before the race. I got a chance to talk to him briefly after the race, but good to see those guys joining us up here in the Dallas area for crits on these weeknights. Here at the Tuesday night crit, we have a Wednesday night crit in McKinney. If you're on the Fort Worth side of things, there's a crit in Fort Worth on Wednesdays. And then on Thursday in Dallas at Fair Park, there is a crit as well. So plenty of opportunities for us to do crits as many as 3 times per week on weeknights if we so choose. And each crit, of course, has a different course, a little bit of a different setup. So we see here another, I think, bridging move up to the 2-man breakaway, and I can't tell who that is. Of course, I knew in the moment, but wasn't paying close attention here in the video. And so, I think all of us are thinking at this point, it's really hard for one man to bridge up. I'm not exactly sure how far the gap was. I want to say maybe like 25 seconds, something like that. But not an impossible bridge, but certainly a huge effort. Was able to talk to Mike and Clint after the race. Clint, so we see 5 laps to go. I think that's what the sign said. Clint has a really strong diesel, and Mike was saying that Clint was a bit stronger there in the breakaway. Mike would take pulls in the headwind section, which is the hardest section. That means, you're getting the most rest when you're not on the front in the headwind section. Mike would take a pull during that section, and then Clint would pull the rest of the lap. So they kind of had this deal worked out where they were working in that fashion. And of course, they were all in terms of the breakaway. So we can see that we're gradually clawing back to the guy in front of us here in the headwind section, where it's really hard to, put out power and make speed in this headwind section. Didn't really have a lot of big representation from teams. In other words, it was a smaller group. We didn't have I guess with the 4 of us on pack, my team, we probably had the most in the way of numbers, and we used that to our advantage. When you have more guys who are active, that bodes well in terms of making race-winning moves. So race-winning moves are the moves that could potentially lead to winning the race, or at least getting on the podium. And when people see that someone on your team is making a race-winning move, they have to react to that potentially, and gives us more cards to play. And honestly, that's, for me, the most fun part of cycling and crit racing. Sure, I could race alone, not on a team, but I like the team aspect of it. It makes it more fun. It makes it more strategic. It makes you have to pay attention more rather than just being a solo independent rider. The way I would put it is that when you're on a team, there are multiple ways to win. In other words, you not personally winning per se, but there are multiple ways to feel like you did something important that led to a win or a good result. So we can see again more efforts to break up the group, to bridge up or to otherwise make moves. So certainly a gap behind me here, and this is a dangerous situation. I was able to mark this, and I'm not particularly keen to help at all because I have a teammate up the road. Again, that's the advantage that I have in this particular situation. Clint, who's with Mike, my teammate, is not on a team, so he doesn't have teammates represented here that are marking or otherwise doing anything. So essentially, my team is the only team that's represented up the road in terms of the two-man breakaway. So what do we have? About getting close to 4.5 laps left. And, you know, it's funny how much it always slows down here. So when we get a gap like that, you would think in some ways it'd be good to push, 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 because it's going to, force someone to take the lead in bridging up behind us, putting out a lot of effort. But it always seems to come back together most often in the headwind. So you can be a little bit patient if you know those tendencies, that if you're gapped, and there's a good chance in the headwind it's going to come back together. Also, it tends to be on the last lap that things come back together. So you could be all strung out going into that headwind section, but it's going to generally come back together. Now, of course, if you're smart, you could go against those tendencies and use those tendencies to your advantage, as you know what people expect is going to happen, and you defeat their expectations. So another attack that we saw up ahead, and again, I needed to make a decision of whether to follow that or to let it go. And I let it go, but I am marking the move that is attempting to mark or bridge the bridging attempt, so to speak. But you can see from the guys behind that we are not, we've not decimated the group, we've not put in a gap, and valiant effort here, given that he was in that recent bridging attempt. So again, strong rider. There's his partner in crime, so to speak. They work together. Philmon right in front of him in the yellow Dallas Racing kit. And so I had my eye on him, Philmon. Philmon was new to the local racing scene last year, and he really made an impression. Multiple podiums. First in the C race, did very well in the B race and so forth, if I recall correctly. So he's somebody that likes to put in the, 3 laps to go attack. So this is his first time I've seen him this year. I don't know if he's back from vacation, school or something like that. So really was a question mark as to his fitness level, and in terms of, is he going to blow our group apart, or is he just getting back into riding and racing? So not sure. That was a question mark, but I had my eye on him in terms of expecting that he would be the one to make a very strong bridging attempt, or he would be the one to initiate a breakaway and so forth. Again, going into the headwind section, and you can see the breakaway or bridging attempt up ahead is starting to fade, and we will soon be on him. He's looking back. He's noting the end of his attempt and that it has failed in terms of bridging up to the breakaway. So what we have at stake here is, if we get to the breakaway, that's the first and second up the road. Otherwise, we're racing for third, which is still a podium place. And top 5 are points in the cup for the entire season. So it's important for us to consider those points for the teams that are vying for first, second, and third in the cup competition. I believe in past years, the winner of the cup, the team gets $1,000, so that's not peanuts. My team currently in the latest standings was 4th, but there was another team just nipping at our heels in 5th place, and a fairly substantial gap from 4th to 3rd. So we have some work to do to move up in the rankings. I believe Dallas Racing, the group that actually puts on this crit, they are in first place in the overall standings. Most of the points come from the A race, not the B race, so it's weighted towards favoring the A race in terms of results and points. If your team does well in the A race, you're going to win the cup, whereas the B race, it's half the points or so. In B race, we only have points for the top 5. In the A race, there's points for the top 10. And let's see, I missed how many laps there were to go. I guess we're down to probably, what, 2 laps? Something like that. And, things always get a little bit more energetic, a little bit more on edge as you get, as the countdown towards the final lap continues. And so this is not currently a bunch, where everyone's together in the field, there's no breakaway. We have a breakaway, which changes the dynamics quite a bit, as we've been talking about the entire time. But certainly when first place is at stake in a bunch finish, it changes things up, I think, a little bit. And again, a little bit more of an attack here. But again, into this headwind, I decide that this move is something I want to mark. I'm trying to look in the screen here to see how far the breakaway is up ahead. But every time, like, we'd be here and they'd be over at that outbuilding. So not a huge gap, maybe a little bit further than I just described. You can see the outbuilding there on the left. But they would be, they'd be well within sight. I didn't count how many seconds it was, but I'd estimate something like 25, 30 seconds. So this is the last lap. Here we are. This is the last lap. So this was a move that went off, and I was at the front. This is bad position for me. I should not be this far to the front. And I didn't want to mark that. I wanted somebody else to jump. And surely I thought somebody is going to jump and not just let third place go away. And then I could get on that wheel, hopefully, and and be bridged up, essentially, using less energy. So Mr. Gibson here, he makes the move, thankfully. And it took me a little bit to get on his wheel, but now I'm got to his wheel, and I put in my attack here. So we can see here on the left, look at the MPA and the power and see how closely they approximate each other. Didn't really have the best technical sprint here, but it was enough to seal up third place here. And wasn't a breakthrough in xert either. It said it was a near breakthrough, but good enough. And third place for us. My teammate up the road, Mike, got second, so Clint won in the breakaway, the 2-man breakaway. So team comes away with second and third, which we're pretty happy about. And it was a fun race from a team tactics standpoint. Anytime you can get two guys on the team on the podium, that's a win for us, although, of course, first place trumps second and third. So congratulations to Clint for excellent race tactics. He puts in lots of attacks over and over. Most of the time, those attacks aren't successful per se, but, it paid off, and kudos to him for animating the race. So that's a little bit of the B race, or combined B race and C race, on a Tuesday night here in Richardson, Texas, just north of Dallas. Hope you enjoyed. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed any of this and would like to see more of this kind of content. And if you have any suggestions on content, please let me know. I'll be happy to consider. Thanks. Bye-bye.